How many? How many? How many? How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All right, what did I get up to?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of How Many, the only podcast on the internet that counts. Today, we actually have a crossover episode going. We are sharing the airwaves with our very favorite Cowboys podcast, the Fix This Shit Rich podcast.
How about y'all fix this shit, Rich?
So joining us today is not only myself and Bob and Scott, our How Many regulars, but we also have Gary, who is a How Many regular, but he also moonlights on a podcast with Mark Dempsey, UK Mark, who is also joining us. And today we are going to take a look at the Cowboys and what we are expecting from them this season. Just want to go around the horn for this roundtable and just kind of get everybody's feelings on what they are concerned about to start the season and what they feel good about. And we'll go ahead and start with Gary.
What I feel good about is the defense, and I think this team is going to have to lean on the defense for the entire season. I think the defense is capable of carrying this team, so that's a good thing. In terms of the way you probably want to be set up, it's probably the most effective way for the Cowboys to make a deeper run in the playoffs is to be led by the defense. If their defense had been just a little bit better last year, even with a mediocre showing against San Francisco, they might have been able to win that game. I mean, it came down to not being able to spike the ball fast enough to get a last-second field goal attempt. I think this team is going to have to be led by its defense. I think the weak side is the offense, and in particular, the offensive line. There's question marks at 4 spots. Right now, Zach Martin's the only thing that on the offensive line. Well, I think that the center is pretty average. And in a NFC East that contains some pretty not average, above average defensive tackles, average at center is a little bit scary. Conor Mcgovern, they tried him at left guard last year. It didn't work out. They're trying him again at left guard this year. Tyler Smith, who was drafted to play left guard while Tyron Smith played left tackle, is now being pushed out to left tackle, unless, of course, we sign Jason Peters. The offensive line's got question marks across the board, and it rarely works out where when you have that many question marks, it all comes up in your favor. There are going to be weak points along the line. That means that the offensive line isn't going to be making it the running game as effective. It makes the passing game less effective. The good news is with a really good defense, maybe you start with better field position. Maybe they actually score some points for you. Maybe you score some on special teams. You get more possessions just by the defense getting the ball back for you. All those things factored in, maybe the offense can still put up some points just because they're going to have more advantages than they've had in years past. But this team's going to be led by its defense, and it's going to go as far as the defense takes it.
All right. Good points all around, Gary. UK Mark, the other half of the great Fix This Shit Rich podcast. What are you thinking for this coming season? What are you concerned about? What do you feel good about?
Hey guys, yeah, I feel pretty good about not only the defense, but also the special teams unit, particularly kick and punt return, with what they've brought in there and developed there. Reasons to be excited, and finally reasons to think we can really flip the field and change field position around and give ourselves a shorter field and score more points there. So I'm positive there. The offense clearly is where the concerns lie. It's where our focus is going to lie. And really, for me, it's all about depth or the lack of the depth. I'm very, very worried about any injury to the likes of CeeDee Lamb, the likes of Zach Martin. We are woefully thin on depth on the offensive line, on some of our creative parts of the offense. I must say, I do like the 14 or 15 first choice players that we would roll out there, assuming they all stay fit. I like what we can do there. I think that we have got better over the course of the last couple of drafts. I'd love to see us doing more, as we've been talking about with Tony Pollard. I think the whole opportunity to use Turpin on not just punt and kick returns, but as a gadget guy out of the slot on some creative plays there on offense would really help us. He gives the defense something to really think about. He's a guy that has to be watched on every single play, and I want to see him on multiple offensive plays. So I like what we can do. I think Jason Peters is the right guy to bring in. Of all of the names that were listed when Tyron Smith got hurt, Jason Peters makes the most sense if we think about Andrew Whitworth, Chuma Edogu, Eric Fisher. Jason Peters is the best choice of that bunch, and certainly keep Tyler Smith at left guard and let him develop. He certainly has surprised quite a few people. Certainly, I put my hands up and say I've been surprised at his progress in camp. Seems to have eradicated some of the basic mistakes he was making. So let's see, but worrying depth-wise, I would say, on offense.
What are you thinking for this year, Scott?
Concerned about the fragility of the team, obviously. I love Zeke and Pollard in our backfield, but then I get concerned that are they going to be able to get very far? Because that offensive line just seems like will it hold up? I don't know about the receiver situation. I mean, I fear if CeeDee Lamb goes down. Turpin, I'm excited to see him on the field, but yeah, I feel like we've kind of seen him on the field before, back when we had Beasley. I mean, yeah, I want to see him do something really cool. I want to see him get out there and be a squirrel again and befuddle the defense. He's so small. I fear him getting hit one time really square, by a real linebacker. But the offensive line worries the hell out of me. Defense, from what we saw in the preseason, it looks okay. But with the Cowboys, it always seems like it looks okay until about 3 games in, when every other team in the league figures out how to defeat our defense. And then suddenly we don't have any players where they're supposed to be, and nobody's reading what they're supposed to read. The points start racking. I'm worried. I would love to say, hey, look, I'm excited. But if Dak gets hurt for 1 game or 2 games or 3 games, we're screwed, I think, as far as that goes. I have no confidence in what's behind him at all. I hate to be a Debbie Downer.
No. I think pessimism is the par for the course right now.
But you don't feel
pretty much the entire fan base.
You don't feel better about Cooper Rush after watching? He won a game last year on the road against a good defensive team.
I still don't feel good about Cooper Rush. I don't see in him NFL quarterback when I watch him play.
But he won an NFL game.
Yeah, but there's a lot of guys out there that have won an NFL game. He just doesn't thrill me. He doesn't fill me with any confidence whatsoever. But then again, that's why they play the game.
I have a unique take on backup quarterbacks anyway, because I have no respect for them whatsoever. Seriously, if you just give me somebody that can take a snap, I won't spend money on one. I'd rather spend that money on another receiver or an offensive lineman.
I see what you're saying.
The backup quarterback that can actually win anything is so incredibly rare. To me, it's just, I want to make my team as good as possible. And if my quarterback goes down for a season, then we just tank and have good draft picks.
Not to turn this into a case for a backup quarterback. I remember being excited when Mark Sanchez was the backup quarterback, and look where that went. And then I remember a few seasons later being excited Andy Dalton was backup quarterback, and look when that went. I'm kind of towards the line of, if your quarterback goes down for more than a game, you're probably screwed.
Yeah.
And it's a freak season. Just sack it and move on.
Right. And with somebody like Andy Dalton comes in and wins you 6 or 7 games when you probably should have won 3, and you end up in the middle of the draft pick instead of a really high pick.
Now, in the case of Sanchez, I will say that Dak does credit Sanchez for helping him with development in his rookie season. And I think veteran backup quarterbacks are sometimes very valuable in that aspect in terms of helping younger quarterbacks. Now, in Dak's case, he's already a veteran at this point. There's not really anything that any veteran quarterback brought in will show him that will probably change his style of play. But when it comes to having somebody really young at that position, a backup quarterback that has some skins on the wall is usually somebody that can add some experience.
Sure.
Young, fresh guy didn't have.
But you're talking about coaching. They could have hired Mark Sanchez as a coach. He could have sat with Dak and helped him watch film and break down defenses and things like that just the same.
Yeah, but sometimes the quarterback coaches that we have on staff aren't necessarily the people that have played in AFC championship games like Sanchez had.
No, I'm not. There's no salary cap on coaches. You could have Doug Nussmeier as your quarterback's coach and have Mark Sanchez as Dak's valet if you want to. I don't care what you call him.
What is interesting, that there has been quite a bit said about Cooper Rush having a very good relationship with Dak. He's the guy that understands Dak the most and is there for him, and they have the best communication. And Cooper has the best ability to kind of help Dak prepare and go through pre-game rituals with him and help him kind of prep for the opposition that's coming up, which is kind of more moving into the role of the backup quarterback. If Dak goes down, I'm with Scott. We're screwed if it's 2, 3, 4 games completely. I like Cooper Rush over the unproven Will Grier. Carolina took him in the 3rd round a few years ago and never did anything with him, and I think there's probably a reason for that. And if you're a 3rd round draft pick and you can't beat out an undrafted guy who's only played 1 game in the NFL, then there's fundamentally something wrong with your leadership or your technique or your understanding. So look, I'm good with Cooper Rush as the backup. I hope I don't see him play 1 snap.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think in the terms of Cooper Rush actually winning a game, I think that offense had more talent on it last year than it did this year to actually elevate his play to get him to win that game. There is no more Amari Cooper go-to like there was in that Vikings game. You know, the offensive line isn't in the same shape it was last year. So it would be much more difficult, I think, for Cooper Rush to actually step in and win a game with this offense. And just to counterpoint something else you said, Scott, in terms of comparing Turpin to Cole Beasley, I think Turpin is a much, much more explosive player than Beasley was. Beasley was a very good route runner, very good in the slot, but he never was able to do anything from a return standpoint. He just didn't have the foot speed for it. To counteract that, we haven't seen Turpin run any routes. So I don't know how effective he would be in the slot. I mean, I'm seeing him more as a reverse jet sweep kind of guy right now. If they could get him to be a consistent route runner and be in the right position out of the slot, I think that adds a huge, huge dynamic presence to the offense that it currently does not have and hasn't had probably since the Tavon Austin days. And even Tavon Austin was kind of disappointing to me in a lot of aspects. But I think he is the closest comp that I can think to Turpin right now.
Have they said definitively yet if that's what Turpin's role is going to be as a returner?
I'm pretty sure he's penciled in as the starting kick and punt returner as of right now.
I think so.
200 yards of returns in a half of a preseason game.
Oh, hey, you know, I'm all for that.
I mean, I just couldn't see the alternative. Who else on the roster would be a better option? Like
nobody. I think I won an MVP in the other league, and a large part of that was what he did on special teams.
As a how many sub bet, maybe we have a little sideline going on how many return touchdowns we get from Turpin through the course.
That would be interesting. All right, Bob, if you have returned from your cave, maybe we can get some opinions from you. What are you concerned about and what do you feel good about?
Concerns, and this is all things people have touched on already, but the offensive line are my top 5 concerns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If the offensive line was intact, even with the issues that we've lost in the receiving core, I'd feel so much better about this team.
It is noted and recorded that you hate Zach Martin.
I understand why that was interpreted that way, but that's not what I meant. But I will say Biotish is I'm not even sure he's average. The offensive line, I think, we've talked about Jason Peters being a possible signing. And even though he's 90 years old, I think he would do a lot to really stabilize the situation, because you've got the domino effect where you wouldn't have to play McGovern. You'd got Steele in the position he's most comfortable in at that point. So that would make a huge difference, because I think the biggest problem with the offensive line is if they don't have that stability, Dak, it's going to be very hard for him to make it through the season without getting hurt. And like we've talked about Cooper Rush, I agree totally with what you guys said. He's ideal in a game situation. Not that he's a guaranteed win, but I feel good about him in a 1 game. But if you have to play him 3, 4, 5 games, you're hosed. And Gary's right. When you start having to rely on the backup quarterback, the season's pretty much a lost cause at that point. But I do feel good about a lot of some other things on the offense. I think one thing that's been touched on, I think Mark brought it up earlier, is the potential of playing Pollard in more of a receiver slot mode this year. Pollard played a lot of receiver in college. And because Gallup's going to be out for a few weeks, and because Tolbert, may need some time to develop still, that might be a good option to maybe get some more snaps for Pollard if he's not going to get as many snaps as he should in the backfield. The other thing is Dalton Schultz is a solid, reliable target at tight end. And we shouldn't forget that, he's entering his prime. And on defense, you've got guys like Micah and Trayvon Diggs, who still are just now not even entering their prime. They're still pre-prime, and they're playing at outstanding levels. So I feel really good about the defense. I think bar is going to be a good addition. One name that nobody has mentioned so far that I think has really, really had a good preseason is Sam Williams. I think there's a guy that he's a second round pick and people are just kind of maying him, going into the preseason. But I think that he will be a big part in helping fill that Gregory void. The defense really does look good. I think Turpin's going to be a huge boost to the special teams, although I'm still concerned somewhat about the kicking situation. But that's, again, if you have to rely on your kicker, just like the backup quarterback, you've got bigger problems. It's kind of a mixed bag for me. I think I feel a little bit better now than I did earlier in the week, especially because of the Peters potential signing.
Things that I am concerned about, obviously, I'm going to echo a lot of everybody's sentiments. The offense, the offensive line, the potential lack of explosiveness at the wide receiver position. Obviously, losing Amari Cooper takes away one of Dak's potential go-tos, especially on third down. Everything is kind of falling on CeeDee Lamb's shoulders in terms of trying to carry the receiving game. I think Tolbert is still way too unproven. I think Gallup, coming off of the injury, if he's completely healthy, I think he can definitely help fill some of the void that I think that receiving core has. But it's kind of a 50-50 proposition if he will come back to his full potential and how quickly he even comes back. Dennis Houston, Noah Brown, Fajoku, I think those are just guys until proven otherwise. Turpin is the only wild card that I could see really adding an additional dimension to this offense. Somebody that could play potentially the slot, as long as we can get him to run consistent routes and be in the place that Dak expects him to be, which is, something that I would be worried about. Just throwing him in, being able to read whenever he has to cut a route short because of a blitz and things like that. And that offensive line, like you guys have been saying, if we don't sign Peters and we have to put Tyler Smith at left tackle, I fear for Dak's health. I think the blind side would just be too exposed. I don't know that necessarily he's going to be receiving a lot of help. If we put Dalton Schultz on that side and just consistently have him try and double team whoever Tyler Smith is trying to block, I think that just takes away another weapon from the offense. It's just going to be difficult trying to cover for the loss of Tyron Smith, who is, a Hall of Fame tackle, one of the greatest Cowboys, I would say, in our history. Zach Martin, I'm not concerned about. He's a consistent all-pro. But, man, the rest of that offensive line, Biotish, I think, is good technique-wise, but he is undersized. Like Gary was saying, there's so many big, strong defensive tackles in our division and in the NFC that we've seen him before just kind of get tossed around at times like a rag doll. And I don't know that he's necessarily bulked up between now and his rookie season to make us expect anything different. Obviously, Conor McGovern, we tried him, like Gary said, at guard last year. He lasted maybe 1 or 2 games before we decided to pull the plug on that. If he wasn't working out last year, I don't know that he's necessarily made any big strides to have us feel secure at that position. With Terrence Steele, he started off the season very good. It was only when they moved him around that he started to kind of falter a little bit. So I feel pretty good about Steele. There's just so many holes that I could see us get exposed in. And I don't know that Dak is the kind of quarterback that excels under pressure. Ever since he had his injury, he hasn't been as willing to run, especially after the calf injury last year. And I don't know that we necessarily want him to be a running mobile quarterback at all times. He may be forced into it just based on, all of the leaks that could potentially happen on the offensive line. Now, what I feel good about, like everybody said, I think the defense could actually take a step up this year from last year, even with the subtraction of Randy Gregory. I think our front four is going to be really good. I think having another year of Gallimore, another year of Ziggy is going to make them better players. DeMarcus Lawrence, as long as he stays healthy, is an all-pro kind of guy. His sack totals have kind of dwindled as the years have gone on, but I still think he brings a strong pass rush presence that teams have to account for. The other side, having to rely on Armstrong, having to rely on Fowler, I think is maybe the only question mark, but I think they'll be able to fill that gap enough, especially on passing situations, by sliding Micah Parsons in to be that extra pass rush guy. And as we all saw last year, as a part-time pass rusher, he was dynamic. I think he should have been the defensive player of the year. He was that special, especially when he was rushing the passers. I expect to see more of that from him, especially with the addition of Anthony Barr and potentially and hopefully, fingers crossed, Van Der Esch going back to his rookie and second year form before all the injuries occurred. And I feel really good about the secondary. I think this is one of the few years where we've actually have some stability in the secondary, where all of the starters that were there last year are back. Anthony Brown is the only one that I have a little bit of concern on, because there was times last year and in previous seasons where he kind of got picked on. I think the rest of that secondary has some really good depth and the potential to not necessarily have Diggs repeat his interception season, but maybe the secondary as a whole may have a better interception rate than we did last year. So those are the things I feel good about, but I don't know that it's going to necessarily be enough to cover the deficiencies of the offense. Now let's get into the how many aspect of our show. We'll go around the horn and figure out how many wins do we feel this Cowboy team is going to have. Will they win the division, and how far will they potentially go in the playoffs? Gary, let's start with you.
Well, I'll start with I do believe they should win the division, still have the best quarterback in the division. That's not even a debate for anyone, including somebody from Philadelphia or Washington or New York. Best quarterback in the division probably means you win the division. The division could be tighter because the Philadelphia roster as a whole is actually pretty good. I just don't think they have the quarterback that can make the whole thing go. As far as total wins, I always look at this the same way. Like I think somewhere between, it's 11 or 12, I think. You might hit 10 if you had a bad bounce. You might hit 13 if you have a couple of lucky bounces. So, 11 or 12 wins, win the division. When it comes to the playoffs themselves, matchups are really important. We had a pretty bad matchup last year because we were not a physical football team. And a physical football team came in here and kicked us around. So matchups matter. But hopefully this team is tougher, especially leaning on the defense. And if that's the case, then maybe the matchup isn't as big a deal. But I feel like this team, if the offensive line can just be mediocre, if they can be average, they have a chance to win a playoff game or two. Who knows what happens once you're in the playoffs? People get hurt. Other team people get hurt. I don't know that I see them making the NFC title game this year because the offensive line is too suspect. But I think they could win one or two playoff games, maybe.
All right. UK Mark, what are you thinking?
Before Tyron Smith went down, I thought we were in for a rough start to the season already. I had us down as starting 2-4 with wins in our division, but losses to the other 4 teams, Bucks, Bengals, Rams, and Eagles. Interestingly enough, despite it being really bad news about Tyron, I don't think our start changes. I still think we start 2-4. And I think that the Cowboys organization and all of the fans, if we start 2-4, need some patience. Because from there, I think we can have a very successful final run. I have a starting 2-4, but winding up 11-6. The interesting thing for me is I have the Eagles going 6-0 in the division. I have the Eagles beating us home and away and beating the Commanders and the Giants home and away. And I have the Eagles winning the division. And I think we do the same as we did last year. And then, frankly, I think all hell breaks loose. I think we end up in a wild card game. I think 11-6 gets us in to the playoffs. I think we lose in a wild card round. I think the Eagles go further on than we do. I think the Eagles have built a phenomenal roster, and I am very worried about them.
Okay. Scott, what are you thinking?
I'm pretty much looking at what happened last year. I'm not hoping for too much more. I was looking at the schedule, and it looks a little bit lighter. I'm still thinking 11 wins, 1 game into the playoff and out. I just don't know that they'll have it hold through the playoffs. Like I say, the ball can bounce either way, but maybe they can get a little further, but I'm just not looking for it. I'm not expecting it.
Bob?
I think they are going to have to ride the defense this year, and I think it'll be good enough to keep them on the winning side of the ledger, but I've got them winning 10. First off, Mark alluded to it, the early season schedule is tough, and
Yeah, it is.
not that they can't beat a lot of those teams, but to Mark's point about the Eagles roster, that roster, Gary's right about Dak being the best quarterback in this division. If the Eagles had a quarterback as good as Dak, they'd probably go to the Super Bowl. That's how good that roster is. They're a good quarterback away from being Super Bowl contenders. The NFC East hasn't had a repeat winner in forever, and that may or may not mean anything, but it just seems like this is going to maybe be a year where we see a little bit of a dip. I don't think this is going to be like a descent, that it's the beginning of like a downward spiral for the team. I think next year, after this year, we should bounce back fine. But I see this being a 10-win season, Eagles winning the division, and us just barely missing the playoffs.
For me, I am kind of in the camp of Mark and Bob. I actually think we are not even going to get to double-digit wins. I think we are going to get off to the slow start that Mark has mentioned, the 2-4 start. And I don't know that this team is necessarily good enough and talented enough as is to rebound from a start like that. I think negative feelings will set into the locker room. I think dissent among the coaching staff and belief in the coaching staff will start to kick in. I could easily see it getting to the point where it turns into a Wade situation in his last year, where they spiral enough with early losses that, especially if they're bad losses, where they weren't even competitive like they were in that Wade year, and Jerry being forced to make a change, because I don't even think he wants McCarthy here to begin with. He didn't set McCarthy up for success this offseason for sure. So if he was already thinking that McCarthy was going to be replaced, I don't see him sticking with him through a really bad start. I'm thinking this team is going to win 9 games, and I think the Eagles will win the division, and I don't think this team makes the playoffs. Now, something that Bob mentioned about rebounding from a bad season, there is rarely ever a repeat winner in this division, so we're due to not win the division, but there is going to be some significant cap relief that will come next year, especially once we get rid of Zeke, which I think will happen. A worse record means that we will have a better draft pick going into next season, better draft position in every round. Hopefully they spend more money this coming offseason than they did this previous offseason. If they do that, if they lock some people up and they have better draft picks, I could definitely see this team rebounding next year. But this year, I think this is the down year that we sometimes see under this regime. And now let's hear from everybody's favorite Springsteen fanatic, Jesse Jackson.
Hello, everyone. Jesse Jackson here. So my thoughts on the upcoming Cowboy season. I will be there every Sunday with Chris, cheering on, doing all our rituals, including putting up banners and playing the Cowboy CD and getting excited for the games, and we will be happy with every victory and be upset with every loss. What really matters, though, is what the team does if they make the playoffs. I don't want to be the negative guy in the bunch, but based on the past, very seldom does this current Cowboy team make the playoffs 2 years in a row. So I think this will be another wasted year. We're already having offensive line issues. We're having kicker issues. I don't know about our receiving core. I think our defense will be very good, but I don't know if we will score enough points to get us in the elite. I know everyone is counting on the NFC East to give us a lot of victories, and that may happen, but just to be safe, I'm going to be the low side, and I'm going to say 7-10, and we waste another year of Dak's career, and Jerry gets one step closer to that big stadium in the sky.
All right, guys, we will circle back probably every maybe 4 games or so and kind of review how the Cowboys are doing. And hopefully some of our early doom and gloom predictions are incorrect and they're actually off to like a 4-0 start or something ridiculous like that. If anybody wants to get a hold of our fine guests and hosts on this episode, Mark, how can they get a hold of you on Twitter?
Look me up on the Fix This Shit Rich podcast or direct tweets to MKD1973.
All right, Bob?
I'm on Twitter at Lukewarm Tallboy.
All right, Gary?
You can find me at travel_cowboy and at Fix It Rich on Twitter.
All right. And if you need to get a hold of Scott Matula, you can reach him at Scott_Matula. I do not want to give him the opportunity to mess up his own Twitter name. If you want to get a hold of me or the podcast, you can reach me on Twitter at Metzkin_Jr. You can reach the podcast at How Many Podcast. You can email us howmanypodcasts@gmail.com. We have a YouTube channel with all of our prior episodes. Or if you want to just go and download our archives, you can go to howmanypodcasts.com and peruse our fine work. We not only do sports, we do music, we do movies, we do food, you name it, we do it. So thank you, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.
Dallas Cowboys. We are the Cowboys.